One team, Dawn, that's missed a bowl game, I believe, in 4 straight years now, has been the Auburn Tigers, who went 5-7 last year. Hugh Freeze, the Auburn head coach, you see right there, he's now 11-14 during 2 years as Auburn's head coach. That is actually an identical record to the one that Brian Harsin had in his 2 years as Auburn's head coach before he was fired and Hugh Freeze was hired to replace him. Auburn has now had 4 consecutive losing seasons. The first time that's happened since 1947 to 1950. It has been a brutal 4 years for the Auburn Tigers, considering how good they usually are in the SEC. So all of that sounds incredibly bleak on the surface. There's still some high expectations for Auburn going into next year. That's because they did an outstanding job in the transfer portal. They've signed a top 10 recruiting class in each of the last 2 years as well. Not only should Auburn have a winning season, the first one since 2020, this might also be a dark horse playoff contender, Dawn, due to their high ceiling. What is the biggest strength of the Auburn Tigers going into next year?
Well, the story is obviously going to be the quarterback, Jackson Arnold, and how much he can improve. But I'll tell you what, his problem at Oklahoma, we think, was a poor supporting cast. That's what we saw last year. No shortage of supporting cast here. This is a terrific offensive line led by their center, Connor Lew, and their left tackle, Xavier Chaplin. And they've got weapons on the outside, guys like Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton for him to throw to that are on paper better than anything Oklahoma had last year. So Jackson Arnold, this supporting cast, look, we're going to see if he's actually that good, if he can live up to that, 5-star, high 4-star billing that he had at Oklahoma. But he certainly has the tools to work with. And Auburn, I think, is picturing having a much more explosive offense, especially with Coleman and Singleton now and all that speed they have out there at receiver.
Yeah, they have the number 2 receiving core in the country, the only school that had 2 of my top 10 receivers in the country, and also my number 7 offensive line in the country, too. So, yeah, supporting cast is definitely the strength for Jackson Arnold and that Auburn team going into next year. Weakness, our biggest question. Was that the problem for Jackson Arnold? That was really the question mark right now, because mentioned before, Jackson Arnold is a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, goes to Oklahoma, had only a 57.7 passing grade last year at Oklahoma, and he got benched for a few games at Oklahoma too for a true freshman. However, it is important to point out just how horrendous that supporting cast was in Oklahoma last year. Oklahoma had the worst receiving grade in the Power 4 with a 54.1 receiving grade, and they were tied for 103rd in offensive line grade too. So it's entirely possible with one of the best receiving corps in the country, 2 stud receivers, and a top 10 offensive line in the country, that Jackson Arnold can really improve and be a guy who looked like a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. But it's also possible that Jackson Arnold just isn't going to live up to the hype he had coming out of high school, and he's just not a 5-star quarterback like we thought he was coming out of high school, and be a recruiting bust, honestly, too. So that's kind of the biggest question mark right now is, okay, was it Oklahoma that made Jackson Arnold that bad last year? Because we've seen time and time again, Dolan, supporting cast for quarterbacks really makes or breaks them in college football and the NFL. The question is, did it break Jackson Arnold last year, and can it make him this year? Or is Jackson Arnold just not as good as we thought he could be?
You know, quarterbacks are always under the microscope, right? We're going to talk about Arch Manning and Nussmeier and Sellers and some of the big names, but I don't think there's a whole lot of guys under a bigger microscope than Arnold, right? Yeah. Because I really think he's the guy that's going to make or break Auburn's season here. And when you look at last year and struggling under that supporting cast, it was tough. In the 6 games he played against SEC opponents, he had a 42.6 passing grade. No. So it was hard for that offense to function. It was hard for him to function in it, right? So now you get to a Hugh Freeze offense where maybe you start to work to his strengths. And one of the things we saw last year that I think kind of surprised us both is he was one of the better rushers in the country. You saw, in Oklahoma's upset against Alabama, they ran the ball all over Alabama, right? And Arnold was a big part of that. 653 rushing yards and 24 explosive runs, top 25 marks in the country. And it's not like he played every game either. He was benched for a couple of games there. So he ran the ball well. He threw the ball in the intermediate range well when he could, when he had time in the pocket to work with. 7 of his 12 touchdowns and no interceptions in the intermediate range. But can he handle pressure? Can he handle SEC pressure? Can he handle it maybe less often behind a good offensive line? He took the 6th most sacks in the country last year, right? Mm-hmm. And he wasn't great under pressure. And I don't blame him. His confidence probably was shaken playing behind that offensive line, and they had so many injuries and everything up front at Oklahoma that you go, okay, Now we're giving you the tools to work with. Can you handle the pressure of it, both of the situation and the environment in Auburn in a high-pressure situation and just under SEC defensive lines, right? The pressure is coming. Can you stand in the pocket and make those throws? If he can do that, there's a really high ceiling here, but he's honestly one of the biggest X factors in the entire SEC race.
He took the 6th most sacks in the country last year. That's a counting stat. He also didn't play for a few of the games, too, when Michael Hawkins was starting at quarterback. So he could have had the most sacks taken in the country, too, if he played the entire season for Oklahoma. So, yeah, pressure is on for Jackson Arnold going into next year, but a guy who should help him out a lot is in that receiving core, and Eric Singleton Jr. transferring in from Georgia Tech, the best wide receiver who transferred this offseason, in our opinion. 2 great years at Georgia Tech, 1,468 receiving yards over his 2 years with the Yellow Jackets, second most among all returning Power 4 wideouts. He also scored above the 99th percentile in PFF's game athleticism score metric, which measures just your size, your speed, your agility. So he's a blazer out there. He has track speed with the ability to hit a home run at any point, 664 receiving yards on 20-plus yard throws, on deep throws over the last 2 years are the most among all returning Power 4 receivers. So Eric Singleton Jr. alongside Cam Coleman, too, which might be the best receiving duo in the country. Those two are going to help out Jackson Arnold, I think, a lot on the outside next year.
2 of your top 10, right? Were they the only team with 2 wide receivers in the top 10, right? I mean, just the look. I think when you look at this Auburn offense, they want to run the ball. Hugh Freeze always wants to run the football anywhere he is. They want to throw it deep downfield. They've got Singleton. You don't get an Eric Singleton in the portal unless you want to chuck home run balls down the field.
Cam Coleman, too, can get downfield.
And Cam Coleman, we know what he can do already. All the true freshman receivers. 2027 is going to be a whole lot of fun. But, no, you've got that set of receivers with those 2 especially. You're trying to get downfield. But it's fun on the defensive side, too, with their pass defense. And a guy we're going to hear about a lot for the next year is their edge defender, Keldrick Faulk. And look, I was watching Faulk's tape recently again. You get a little Jason Pierre-Paul feel.
Yeah.
He's 6'6", he's 270. There's a lot of length. He's got very long arms. He can reduce down and play, on the inside shade or head up over the tackle. He's an awesome run defender. 23 run defense stops last year. Also 45 pressures and 9 sacks. He can do a little bit of everything. I think there's a little more to go when it comes to his pass rush technique, but Keldrick Faulk has the chance to be one of the elite edge rushers in college football this season. They lost Jalen McLeod on the other side of him off the edge, but Faulk has got elite tools, and he's got the ability to play in both dimensions. He's not just a designated pass rusher. That was the feeling I got. Just in my head, the name Jason Pierre-Paul came up, and he was a top 15 pick in the draft himself back in the day out of USF. I think Faulk's got similar traits, and he may be the biggest key to this defense really wrecking games up front.
He could absolutely be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft in 2026, too. He is a freaky player who could play as an edge rusher and even kick inside a little bit for Auburn, too. He's a really powerful defensive lineman. All right, Dolan, their win total is set at 7.5 by FanDuel, which means FanDuel and all the sportsbooks think Auburn's finally going to break that 4-year-long losing streak that they've had right now. Are you taking the over and saying, hey, they're going to be even better than that? Or are you saying, hey, listen, let's pump the brakes on Auburn a little bit. I know they got all this talent coming in, but this is still a team that's not had a winning season since 2020.
So there's a couple of things I like about this. And for several of these teams, I'm going to point out like an out-of-conference matchup here and there early in the season that's really going to tell us a lot. I think their Week 1 game at Baylor on the Friday of Week 1 is going to tell us a whole lot about both of those teams. We'll talk about Baylor in the Big 12 preview, but I think that's a huge game because you have 2 teams that are kind of on similar ground, right? They're talented. They want to compete at the top of their conferences. They haven't quite got there yet. There's some X factors in that, but I think that early game against Baylor on the road, Week 1, is going to tell us a lot about Auburn. But if you look at their SEC schedule, it's also not the most brutal out of all of these teams. There's some winnable games here, maybe some 50-50 games, depending on how you believe in Auburn's talent. If they get to the second half of their schedule, 4-2, maybe even 5-1, I think they've got a good runway the second half of the year. But I think I like the over 7.5 there. They need it. Let's be real. Hugh Freeze needs to be over that number, considering you mentioned it. They haven't made a bowl game in 4 years. But I think I'm going to take the over there. And that Week 1 game actually at Baylor out of conference fascinates me a lot.
I'm also taking the over for Auburn right now. I think 8-4, even 9-3 is certainly possible for the Auburn Tigers next year. Maybe even better than that. They really hit their ceiling and become a true college football playoff contender. I think at the very least, they have enough talent on offense and defense to at least have a winning record next year. If Jackson Arnold can live up to the high school 5-star hype he had, Auburn can be a college football playoff contender, in my opinion, too, which is saying a lot considering, like I said before, 4 straight losing seasons for the Tigers, which hasn't happened in like 75 years at that program. So I think it should be a big bounce back for Auburn next year, and it better be a big bounce back for Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers next year.